Welcome to the main stage, MindBody Chief Executive Officer, Fritz Landman.
All right, let's get this party started. Yeah, welcome to Bold 2022. If only every other week of being the CEO of MindBody was a big celebration like this. So I'm Fritz, I'm the new CEO of MindBody. I'm so excited to welcome all of you here. I'm so excited to get to know so many more of you over the coming days and really to get your feedback on how we can better serve you. It's been a rough few years in the industry, so I think we've earned a little bit of opportunity to celebrate tonight. And that's going to be the message that you're going to see our presenters for this session share. Believe me when I say that the recovery is happening. Most of us are starting to see that in our businesses. Most of you should be starting to see that in our businesses. We're not all the way back, but it's happening. And the 5 signals that we have to give you confidence in the recovery is, first, our combined consumer touch points, right? We have ClassPass as part of the MindBody ecosystem now, and we have the MindBody Marketplace app, the 2 biggest forms of consumer aggregation and visibility into consumer data in the world of wellness. And what we see with both of those apps is up and to the right charts. Not all the way back, but getting there. Second, when we survey our customers, when we survey our consumers, they tell us that they actually do prefer in-person wellness experiences. And ClassPass data shows if they go back once to an in-person experience and get off from off their couch, they go back more than they were going pre-pandemic. And so Zach and Beth will show in a bit that it's just about getting them back into these experiences, giving them that taste, and they'll come right back. Further, 81% of consumers say wellness is more important to them than ever before. I think the pandemic made us all a lot more aware of how important our health, wellness, and mental health is. 4, macro trend. Millennials tell us that they are valuing experiences more than things, right? That's been a long trend. And then 5, and you can look at many MindBody customers who are public companies and have to report to Wall Street how their sales performance is going. The folks who are selling franchisees are selling a lot of franchise licenses. Now, it's taking time for those licenses to come online because of supply chain issues, hiring issues, and so forth. But thousands and thousands of new fitness studios, new spas, new salons are going to be coming online in the next 12 to 18 months. As with all things, it's just a matter of perspective. If you look at just the last 2 years, the picture's pretty bleak, right? We were at the end of 2019, heading into our big New Year's rush for the fitness entrepreneurs in the room, biggest ever, and then what we thought was gonna be a few months ended up being 2 years longer even of stagnation, false starts, new outbreaks of the pandemic. So if you zoom in on the 2-year picture, it looks pretty rough. But if you zoom in on the last 6 months, it starts to look a lot better. The world is getting beyond the pandemic. But if you zoom out for the 20-year picture, and that's the one that I think the most about as a long-term investor in this category, is a massive hockey stick. The world is prioritizing wellness. And that, while the pandemic may have stopped that briefly, it didn't stop that global macro multi-decade trend. So I'm absolutely bullish about where the wellness industry is headed, both in the near term and in the long term. And I'm so fired up for 2 of our key business leaders at ClassPass and MindBody, Zach Apter and Beth Leibovich, to share our data with you all. Again, this is data that only MindBody has access to, the 2 biggest pools of consumer in the industry. So without further ado, let me get off the stage and welcome Zach and Beth.
Thank you, Fritz, and thank you, everyone. It is so awesome to be here at MindBody Bold 2022. My name is Zach Apter. I'm the SVP of Consumer Revenue and Growth at MindBody.
And I'm Beth Leibovich. I'm the Director of Research at MindBody. Thank you.
And we're here to talk with you about the state of the industry, where things sit in 2022. Now, at MindBody, we have a great number, tens of thousands of amazing relationships with fitness and wellness providers all over the world. And at the same time, millions of consumers use mind-body technology to book fitness classes and wellness experiences every day. And so as a result, we have a really interesting and unique vantage point on what's happening in our category. And so we're super excited today to be able to have the opportunity to share with you some of the things that we're seeing, where we've been, where we are, and where we're going. We're going to talk about three things today, three primary themes or topics. The first, of course, obviously, is COVID. Where do things stand in terms of the pandemic recovery? And whether you think about COVID in a sort of epidemiological sense, and you're one of those people who says COVID is over, it's in the rearview mirror, or whether you say, look, it's still a public health crisis, it's very much with us. In a sense, it doesn't really matter. The deep structural, institutional, cultural, psychological, economic effects of COVID are with us now, and they're going to remain with us for many, many years to come. So we have to deal with that. Second is the economy. Nobody was able to predict what sort of economic environment we were going to find ourselves in as we emerged from the pandemic. I remember in the summer of 2020, folks talked about the roaring 20s that were likely to ensue, that in the 1918 and 1919 Spanish influenza, the next decade around the world was an unparalleled era of growth and economic prosperity. And I think we can agree that although we're seeing lots of bright spots, there are some challenging economic aspects that are happening all around us. Inflation is at the front of everybody's minds. It's affecting you, it's affecting your businesses, it's affecting consumer psychology, their needs, their behaviors, how they think about where they spend their money. So we have to talk about where we are in terms of the economic climate. And then lastly, technology trends. Independent of the global public health situation, independent of macroeconomic trends, technology continues a relentless growth and innovation, unabated. Mark Andreessen famously said, software is eating the world. That's no different in fitness and wellness. Software is eating fitness and wellness, the fitness and wellness category. And so we're here to tease out and talk about some of the interesting tech trends that we see as well. So with that, Beth, let's get started.
Okay, let's talk about the pandemic and its impact on the wellness industry, all of our favorite topic. And I think you all have seen it more personally than any stats that I could put up here, because you experienced it yourself over the last 2 years. But 25% of health and fitness facilities have closed since the start. And so this is more of our big box gyms, our larger health facilities, some notable names that went bankrupt or did a lot of restructuring during this time were 24 Hour Fitness, Town Sports International. For many of you, though, you identify more as like a boutique fitness place if you're in the fitness industry. And actually 30% of your peers closed during the pandemic. And that stat is actually up 11% since January of 2021. So there's this long tail that is still playing out today. In fact, I recently read that SoulCycle is closing 20 of its 83 locations. So it's still happening. Notable closures here were YogaWorks, Flywheel, CYC Fitness. And the wellness industry, it was hit harder than most. Back in April of 21, there was a survey that just looked at businesses in general that have employees. Only 3% of them had closed, and that is in stark contrast to the numbers that we're seeing here, specifically with the wellness industry. It wasn't just business closures, though. It was also jobs. So 1.5 million industry jobs got cut. And sadly, a lot of those service practitioners, they had to go find something else to do while we were all shut. And so now we're in this tricky place where as we start to rebuild, we have less people that we can actually hire. And I think we're seeing this in the data, but I assume we're seeing it in the room too, so I'll ask for a show of hands. Raise your hand if you're having a hard time hiring and training people right now. Exactly. And we're not just seeing it in this poll, but my research team, we do a lot of research surveys. So if you've ever gotten a survey from the MindBody research team and you've taken it, thank you. We poll you twice a year, and it fuels things like this conversation. But we asked you guys, What are your biggest challenges right now as a business? The first one was client acquisition, not surprising. 20% of you said, my biggest challenge is client acquisition. But right under that, at 19% of you, you said, my biggest challenge right now is simply hiring and training people. Some other interesting stuff also happened during the pandemic. So we had the adoption of work from home for the first time ever. So a lot of our workers decided, you know what? I like the convenience of working from home, and I'm gonna continue doing that. We're also experiencing what they're referring to as the Great Resignation. And this is where 47 million Americans just decided to leave the workforce in this unprecedented exodus. So all of this plays into why you might be having a particularly hard time hiring, training, and retaining employees right now. And you'll have to excuse me, I'm a little out of breath. I have a small human squishing my lungs, so it makes it hard to breathe. So it didn't just affect our businesses, it didn't just affect our staff, it also affected our own well-being and the well-being of the people we serve. So what do I mean? 50% of consumers say the pandemic, it impacted their mental wellness. 42% said it impacted their weight. Not surprising, many of us became largely sedentary during the pandemic. And 45% report being stressed on a regular basis, and this is the one I want to double click into. So myriad studies were done on work from home culture during this time, and some common themes: workers are putting in longer days, they're putting in longer weeks, and they're having a harder time unplugging. A study of Microsoft employees, for example, found that they were working on average 10% more during the week than they were before the pandemic. There was another interesting study. It was a VPN company, so they basically watched the internet traffic of employees, and they found during the lunch hour, there was no meaningful decline in traffic. So that just means all those work from home people were skipping lunch or eating at their desk. I'm guilty of this. And then another one, they looked at the Thanksgiving holiday, and they found that 41%, there was a 41% increase over the Thanksgiving holiday as compared to other weekends, meaning people are working when they should be hanging out with family. So everybody's still adjusting to this work from home culture, and frankly, the workers are feeling it. So 45% of people say they're working more than before the pandemic, and sadly, 75% say that they're working on the weekends. And we know this is a big problem because so much of wellness has to do with rest and rejuvenation, and simply our consumers are not doing that. So it puts us in this place where we have businesses that are reeling from the last 2.5 years of the pandemic, but we also have a consumer base that needs us more than they've ever needed us. So how are consumers coming back? What we're looking at here is bookings in the mind-body ecosystem, and I'll just take you on a little journey. Obviously, that first dip is the initial shutdown in March 2020. From there, we started to climb up, and we got to this point in June 2021, so this was the summer of 21. And from there, we went into last holiday season where we experienced a lot of variants, Delta, Omicron, we had renewed closures. But frankly, myself and I think a lot of people in the industry thought, you know what, 2022 is gonna hit and it's gonna go up and to the right, and it's all gonna go back to being better. And that's not what happened. Some people had a worse summer this summer than they had last summer. And so we're in this place where we're in this kind of established new normal. There's no real silver bullet that's getting us to pre-pandemic numbers, but we are eking towards it. But this is like a very macro level view, and so I think when we look at it in more nuanced ways, not just in aggregate, we actually see some interesting silver linings. And so for that, I'm gonna pass it to Zach.
Thanks, Beth. So yes, that's right. We have to decompose this overall macro view. You know, even if we can say globally we're at something like 80, 85, 90% recovery, the level of recovery across different slices is very different. And as I show these numbers, I'm sure folks in the room who are in the business in different fitness and wellness modalities or in different geographies will recognize some of the things that I'm showing. When we survey business owners and we ask them, are you back relative to your pre-COVID levels in terms of either your reservations or your revenue? What we see is this really interesting picture emerge where Wellness services, spa, integrative health, and salon, about half of owners in those categories say that they're about back or even more further ahead than they were prior to COVID in 2019. We also see some really promising movement. We asked folks this question in December of 2021. We asked it again in July of 2022. And what we saw is some nice movement. So businesses are coming back. But this very interesting dichotomy, because of course on the right here we have fitness, where in December 21, only 21% of fitness business owners said they were back. And today only about 35% of fitness business owners will say that they're back. There's a lot of reasons for this, of course. Fitness had much more of an in-home virtual movement towards people doing workouts in their living room, towards subscribing to digital services, working out outside, a lot of potential substitutes for your pre-existing pre-COVID routine. Whereas many of the things that are on the left here, you really can't do but in an offline environment. It's hard to get your hair cut, hard to get your nails done, hard to get a massage from an experienced practitioner. So primarily, that's the biggest reason why we're seeing fitness lagging, is just there's a substitutability question of some of the things that people like to do pre-COVID, they found a replacement for. But there's actually a bigger factor that's going on here. And this was fascinating. We surveyed across the country in the United States a wide variety of geographies and demographic slices. And very, very consistently, what we saw was that about 1 in 3 people, 30%, said, when we asked them, how much of your pre-COVID routine are you currently doing? Just your frequency. How many times a week? How many times a month are you working out? And what we found was that about 1 in 3 people said, I'm not doing anything at all. I used to do something, and now I'm doing nothing. They've completely fallen off the wagon. And if you think about sort of a demand shock in any business, in any category or sector of the economy, if 30% of people's activity just goes away, sort of what that means. And in a sense, that actually makes this recovery trajectory look much, much better. Because if we said, okay, well, we're about 80 or 85% recovered, but yet 30% of people aren't doing anything, then that means those that are doing something are actually doing more than they were before. Beth's going to talk about that. But this headwind and this sort of like notion that we've got to get people off the couch, remotivated, as folks who are in the fitness business in this room know, any friction between you and your workout is likely to cause you not to do that workout. Motivation is so key. Fitness is sort of the only thing that you buy and then actively negotiate against yourself to use. There's that experiment, where they have the children with the donuts and they see how long they can wait before they eat the donut. Fitness is like the opposite of that. It's like, there's a workout, no, I will do anything to not have to do that today. So motivation and getting those folks back into the saddle, back into offline experiences is absolutely key. There is some remaining unease with respect to COVID when it comes to wellness. About a quarter of Americans say that they're still kind of uncomfortable when visiting a wellness business. 35% of Americans, 1 in 3, are still concerned with getting COVID. So though that number is sort of the minority, most folks are ready to go back. And for them, COVID is not really a top of mind concern. There are some people for whom this is still a thing that they think about. There's also been a very uneven recovery by geography. I promise this is not a map of the US presidential election, although it kind of looks that way. The states in red are those that are seeing a lag in recovery, those that are still about 20% below 2019 levels. States in green are sort of on the opposite end of the spectrum that are fully recovered at or above 2019 levels, and then yellow is somewhere in between. And of course, there's some patterns that you can see here. It's not just, though, a question of sort of COVID sensitivity or progressive versus conservative politics. It actually has to do with work from home, return to work, commuting patterns. The states in red here, sorry, not the red states, states in red here, forgive my slip. Los Angeles, San Francisco, Seattle, New York, Boston, Washington, D.C. all had large, thriving central business districts with huge inflow of commuters every single day. in Manhattan, the average daytime population would go from 2 million people to 4 million people as people came in from New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Long Island, Connecticut, et cetera. And all of those people were coming in and taking classes in the morning and at lunch and after work. And so as people stopped going into work, that caused a real supply contraction. Folks in this room are very aware of that. And so now as people start to return to work, there's just not as much available to do in those areas. And return to work is we're still way, way short of where we were in 2019. Only about 44%, I think, of badge swipes, according to a third party named Castle, are sort of happening today relative to pre-COVID. So that combined with some of the political sensitivity is what's driving this uneven recovery by geography. We also see it by genre. Here is the level of recovery from left to right in terms of different fitness genres. You see boot camp and sports training on the left at recovered or above. On the far right, you see yoga and cycling. Cycling largely due to the Peloton effect. Yoga has to do with some of the substitutability issues that I mentioned earlier about being able to do that in your living room using a subscription service or YouTube for free, et cetera, et cetera. So we see this sort of real spread by genre. In the wellness and in the spa salon categories, it's a little bit narrower. Most categories going from left to right, nutrition, massage, chiro, are recovered. Even those that are sort of more in the red on the far right are still sort of in that margin of error of basically recovered. So seeing sort of a wide distribution on the fitness side, a narrower distribution on the wellness side of level of recovery. So Beth, tell us about the good news.
Okay, so that was a lot of less good news, but there is good news. And it's that the definition of wellness is evolving. The pandemic materially changed how our consumers think of wellness, and I think that's actually a really good byproduct of a rough couple years. So let me tell you what we mean. Wellness now encompasses more than just working out and staying in shape. It spans mental, physical, social, spiritual, all these types of wellness. And 78% of consumers feel that wellness is more important than it's ever been, and they are specifically prioritizing wellness modalities that help them with their mental health. And so we did a poll. We asked consumers, we said, what are you adding to your routine that's helping you with your mental health? And they said some cool stuff. They said more rest, spending time outside, fun and play, spending time with friends, going out, dancing. Hopefully a lot of us will be dancing at the Bold Bash. Meditation, breath work, therapy, energy work. So it's expanding, it's evolving. It's not just about fitness and exercise anymore. But that said, they also did say that fitness was a big part of their mental wellness. And so let's talk about that. What is the overlap between fitness and mental health? And I think any of you in here know that whatever you bring your consumers, whether it's beauty, integrative health, or fitness, you understand the overlap of mental wellness with that modality. But the key here is that our consumers are starting to see it more explicitly than ever. And so here's how we know. Back in 2019, we asked people, what are your motivations for exercising? And this is what we heard. Control weight, feel good, live a long, healthy life. I kind of think of this as like the headlines on a fitness magazine of yesteryear. And then we asked them again in 2021, and look at what they said. Reduce stress, feel better mentally. Their motivations had evolved. Consumers are explicitly getting the mind-body connection. Mind-body, pun intended, but for reality, they're actually getting it. Other evolutions that are taking place. Our consumers are increasing the variety of wellness services they do. So here we have meditation, nutrition counseling, salon and spa memberships back in 2019 as compared to 2021. Look at that uptick. So what this tells me is that for all of you, you could be expanding the type of services that you offer. You could also be expanding who you're servicing, because notice that the increase here is primarily driven by millennials and by men. Okay, some more good news. While it's true that some people are just not working out at all, they've fallen off the wagon, what we know is that fitness enthusiasts, so the people who have gone back, are actually going back more. So they are going 10% more often than they were before the pandemic. And what's great about that is that we know once users get into the into your facilities, they're gonna get hooked, they're gonna come back for more. So we think this is like a really good long-term indicator of what's to come. It's just a matter of how long it takes us to get there. More good news is that 96% of consumers say that their fitness routines are gonna stay the same or increase in the next 6 months. And 77% say they are attending the same amount or more in-person classes right now than they did before the pandemic. And the key here is in person, so that's what I wanna talk about next. And what I wanna say here is the benefits of in-person wellness have persisted. Your in-person services are now and will continue to be a huge differentiator for you. And there's one reason for that: community. In person, you are more motivated by those around you to push yourself harder and get the results that you're looking for. Our consumers tell us this. In person, you have people holding you accountable. They're looking for you to show up to that 6 a.m. class. If you don't show up, they're probably gonna send you a text about it. And they help you maintain a regular routine. In person, you have an instructor who knows you, who knows your name, who cares that you show up and will modify so that you can actually get the results that you're looking for. So in person creates a community that really cannot be substituted off in a virtual setting. So it's a differentiator. One other reason people return to in-person, and this is less about community, but I still think it's fascinating, your equipment. So just don't underestimate the value of the equipment that you have at your business to bring people, leverage it to get them back into the building. Okay, let's recap. We talked about the pandemic, talked about the challenges, we talked about how our consumers have evolved during this time. And so I think the key takeaway is your businesses have to evolve, just like the consumer base has. And I think of it in 3 ways. There is what you're offering, who you're offering it to, and how you're talking about it. So takeaway 1, test out new services. Try out services that meet the needs of mental health. All those new modalities that people are adding to vary up their routine. Alternatively, try partnerships. One of the things that my team, we came up with this term, it's called cooperation. It's a made-up term, but it's this idea of partnering up with another business that's not necessarily like in competition with you. So we call it cooperation because you offer services that are really useful to one another. So imagine like a yoga studio pairing up with a massage studio and offering some sort of a membership, like a 10-class pack and two massages a month. What's interesting about that is this partnership might actually get you both more members because you can tap into each other's member bases without being in competition. The point is, try new things, try new services, and test out new things into the market. Expand your target market, so take a look at who your customer demographic is and ask yourself, who's not in this customer demographic? Interestingly, when we look at the MindBody app, 89% of your customers that are on the MindBody app are women with a median age of 37. But what we know is that the general population is actually only 57, general population of people who do fitness are only 57% women. So there could be a lot of people that do not identify as women that you could be servicing that maybe you are not. And this is just one example, but just look at your customer base, say, who's not here? And maybe I should be working to get them in the door. And lastly, broaden your message. Just speak explicitly about the benefits of your services and how they help with mental health, because this is such an important top of mind topic for consumers right now. Okay, so that was the pandemic. Now let's talk about our next favorite topic, which is the economy and how it's overlapping with our industry. So in July, we asked consumers how concerned they were about various current issues. And at 35%, people were concerned about getting sick from COVID. From there, geopolitical conflicts, so things like the war in Ukraine, physical health, mental well-being, we've already talked about those. But really the highest concern that consumers have, the economy, rise in interest rates, inflation, a recession, and price increases. There's similar data from Pew Research that says, there's like 19% of Americans that are worried about getting sick from COVID, but 71% view inflation as like the biggest problem. So how is inflation looking across industries? Well, here we have various inflation rates, and I'll focus you on the two black bars because that first one at 8.6% is the annual inflation rate, so that's what we want to compare to. And then the next one at 5.3% is how wages have inflated over the last year. And so what we see is just filling up your car, heating your house, cooling your house, and buying a gallon of milk has never cost more, or it cost significantly more than it did last year. It's far outpacing inflation. But then the bars in blue, that's your services. So your services have also increased in prices. Spa and salon services are kind of on track with the annual inflation rate, but notably they're still higher than wage inflation, right? So somebody trying to get one of your services is still having to pay more relatively than they did last year for it. So, but these increases, at least in our industries, they make sense, right? Because the cost of you providing these services have gone up. Your staff wages have gone up, rent, supplies, utilities, et cetera. So this makes sense. And as a response, consumers are responding. 77% say that they are planning to make fewer purchases. So they're asking hard questions about what do I need to buy, what do I not need to buy? And 74% are bargain hunting. So they're trying to make sure that their dollar goes really far. That said, we actually have some better news when it comes to consumers when they're specifically buying in our industry. So I'll pass that to Zach.
Yes, and this actually, I think, is the most exciting thing to take away from this presentation, which is when we talk to consumers, 2/3 of them will say that wellness spending is more important than other leisure expenses. And in fact, when we ask people to sort of stack rank and say, what categories are you likely to either continue how much you're spending or even increase your level of spend, at the very, very top, wellness services and in-person fitness classes. This is everything. You ask across whether it's improving your home or buying a car, travel and tourism, you see here at the bottom, eating in at a restaurant or bar. The number one and number two things that people say I want to spend more money on are wellness services and in-person fitness classes. So this is an amazing piece of news that we're seeing. Now, let's talk about inflation. Many businesses are responding to the inflationary environment, and Beth talked about all of your input costs are going up, your rent is higher, your instructor wages are higher, your electricity is higher, and so you're asking yourself, okay, well, how do I maintain my operating income? How do I maintain my cash flow? And the first thing that you think is, okay, well, maybe I should be raising my prices. I look at everywhere else is more expensive, every other thing that I'm buying in the grocery store, all those other categories that Beth walked through. So, should I be raising my prices as well? Looking across the board here at wellness businesses, salon spas, and fitness businesses, many folks have made the choice to, okay, I'm going to go ahead and increase my prices. This is the percentage of people who have increased their prices in the last 12 months. And like I said, this makes sense in the face of rising costs as a way to make sure that you preserve your income and your cash flow. But this is a double-edged sword because of the consumer concerns around inflation and the increased price sensitivity that individuals, your customers, your clients are feeling. And one of the big barriers to people coming back to in-person is a feeling that this stuff is still too expensive. So when we survey people across geographies and demographics, we get and ask people, if you are going to fewer, and this is studio fitness specifically, if you're going to fewer classes now than you were pre-COVID, what's the number one thing holding you back? And across the United States, what we hear is that the number one thing is that classes are too expensive. In the urban cores, where there are more younger folks who have less disposable income, that number is as high as 50%. In the suburbs, where people have a little bit more disposable income, a little bit older, the number is a bit lower, it's about 25%. But that presents this conundrum because if we want to try and preserve income and cash flow by raising our prices, if our customers have become more price sensitive, then we actually could end up destroying revenue. We could end up making less money when we raise our prices because the number of people who end up buying is less than the amount that we increased our prices. So it's sort of a really, really difficult puzzle or conundrum that you all are faced with in this inflationary environment. And so the question is, okay, how do we solve it? Well, the first is around competitive differentiation. Sort of a core B-School 101 tenet is that competitive differentiation drives pricing power. The more sticky your customers are to your business, the more loyal they are, the more difficult it is to find any substitute near them. What you provide is unique and valuable. That gives you an opportunity to raise prices. So all those things that we talked about before around, is it the quality of the community? Is it the equipment in your studio? Is it the amenities? Is it the experience in your instructor training? What is the thing that drives competitive differentiation such that you have license to raise prices? And your customers will understand, we have inflation everywhere, and so it makes sense. And when you do that, they won't leave you because of how unique and unsubstitutable you are. The second way to solve the puzzle is through price discrimination. Price discrimination is the notion that for the same service, you can charge different people different amounts. So where are there new audience to go acquire who maybe they're more price sensitive, but you can give them a different kind of offer? Maybe there are ways to harvest your email list, to find the folks who maybe are only going in off-peak times. Those might be folks who are maybe a little bit more price sensitive because they have schedule flexibility. And those are the folks who you can charge lower prices to. And then conversely, who are the folks who really, really use you and who you have a license to maybe raise the price of your 10-pack or raise the price of your membership? So finding those ways to charge for the same thing, different audiences, different amounts. And then the third piece is service expansion. So this is a little bit of a different concept, which is finding different services to offer those different audiences. Maybe it's off-peak times. Maybe it's a teaser massage that's only 30 minutes. Maybe it's a manicure with a little bit less of the stuff that you usually provide. So different ways to segment the market, expand your menu of services. That's on the low end. And on the high end, maybe there's a more premium service that you can offer to find that clientele who does have a higher willingness to pay and will tolerate higher pricing. So it's a very challenging problem, but there are ways out of it as you think through these three things: competitive differentiation, price discrimination, and service expansion. All right. Well, we would be remiss not to talk about tech trends in any sort of state of the industry presentation. So I'm going to hand it back over to Beth to talk about some of the things that we're seeing in the industry.
This is the fun stuff. So here are some tech trends that we have been keeping an eye on. I'll show you a video. So you have robotic tech that provides services that your staff typically specialize in, like massage, lashes, brows. You have augmented reality, where you can check out how you're actually going to look on the other side of the service. So should I dye my hair blue? I don't know if this is a good idea. Let's check it out. You have robotic nails, and these sorts of machines can do really high-end nail art that would typically cost a lot of money at a lower cost. You have virtual reality. If you haven't tried this, you certainly should. Maybe a child has brought a VR headset into your home at this point. I'm still getting seasick when I do it, so I try to avoid it. But this is a modality that is going to more and more become some sort of a competitor with what you're offering. You also have the ability to take classes in various VR locations. So let's say I want to take a yoga class in Bali, I want to go to Hawaii, I can do that. And then lastly, I can get feedback from this technology. So whereas you would usually have to have a practitioner giving you feedback on your posture or how you're doing things, this is something that technology could technically do. And speaking to these technologies, we think they're, again, a response to the pandemic. So we can't find staff, so maybe we bring in robotics. Consumers are still wary of COVID, so maybe doing a touchless service that doesn't involve a human is good. And regardless of if you're into this or not, I think there's like two ways that you can respond. You can say, I'm going to bring these cool technologies into my business to differentiate myself because maybe it's too expensive for consumers to do them on their own. So let's bring them in, and that'll be a differentiator. Or you could say, I'm going to differentiate against this technology and explain to my consumers why what we do here is better. And I think both of those are really valid responses, but regardless, we have to acknowledge that our consumers have more at-home substitutes than they ever have. So we have to be really cognizant of what our message is against those technologies. So this is a really flashy tech, and it's exciting, and we're going to keep an eye on it as more things continue to progress. But we actually think it's the less flashy technology that is around the corner. So the future's coming, but instead of the flashy technology, let's talk about some of the stuff that MindBody is investing in that we think is actually going to set your business up for success in the next 1 to 5 years.
Great. So the first thing that we're seeing is that effectively every single offline business is becoming an e-commerce business. This is a really interesting statistic that counts what percentage of total reservations are happening offline and in person versus online in a digital environment. And what we can see here on the left is only 15% of bookings in spa salon happen online. In fitness, we're a little bit further along the way in the journey, but still only 58% of bookings are happening online. So that means 42% of bookings are still happening offline. And as this happens more and more, this was a trend that was absolutely accelerated by COVID. As this happens more and more, you're going to turn more and more into an e-commerce business and have to think through technology issues around how do I show up in Google search? What's my app strategy? Should I be thinking about SEO? All the sorts of things that a traditional e-commerce business would have to worry about, you're going to have to think about as well. So even though it's sort of less flashy than some of the earlier stuff that Beth showed, this is just an absolutely critical consideration as you think about how you operate your business going forward. And this transformation is not a trivial one. The food delivery industry was something like, or was totally nascent in the early 2010s, and it was something like 1% or 2% of total orders at restaurants happened online. Now that number is something like 30 or 40%, and so you can think about the value creation and what that's meant to be a restaurant, to have to live in a world where there's DoorDash and you have to worry about and think about couriers and your ratings and reviews online and all those things that you show up on as an e-commerce business. So it's just an absolutely critical thing that you need to think through. The second is that the use cases for AI and ML are totally exploding. This is an example from ClassPass. It's a feature called Instructor Rank. And what this shows is by using a neural net, you can actually figure out really quickly which of your instructors are likely to be breakout stars within a matter of weeks. So these are two instructors, and by looking at reservation patterns that are happening amongst your clientele, we can see that instructor A is likely to become a breakout top percentile star, and instructor B is just likely to be mediocre. And that's super interesting. You can look at this as described by things like how far are your clients willing to travel for an individual instructor? Do they have a higher level of price sensitivity or not? For certain instructors, do they repeat go and change their schedule in order to go to the classes that that particular instructor teaches? So we could provide you with that kind of data, and we use AI ML to figure out super fast which instructors are likely to be great. At ClassPass as well, and by the way, this is not a pitch for ClassPass, just a set of illustrations of how we use AI ML. We'll talk in a second about what it means for your business. But another thing that is a really high value, high impact way that we utilize AI is around dynamic pricing and figuring out what is the right price to show for an individual impression. So that moment when somebody opens an app, does a search for your studio, finds your listing, clicks into the class and says, I want to take that class. What is the right price to show to maximize the amount of money that you make from the person looking at that particular schedule? So the sort of making demand curves and trying to predict what is the likelihood of conversion times what is the amount that you'll make if they actually do convert, and then exploding that over millions and millions of schedules and billions of impressions in order to make studios as much money as possible. Here's an example of a customized, personalized experience, a curated set of recommendations around opportunities to go discover new things, when to send somebody a push notification, when's the right time to send somebody a message, what is the right message to be in order to maximize the chance that they actually take advantage of whatever you happen to be sending. So just some examples here, and of course you could say, well, that's great for ClassPass. ClassPass can invest hundreds of millions of dollars in engineering and in AI ML tools, but what does it mean for me? So what it means for you is that at MindBody, we are investing in tools that bring you the very best of AI ML right inside the core software. So things like personalized class recommendations, last-minute offers, lead management, what is, as I said, the right message to send to a person at the right moment in time in order to maximize the likelihood that they buy something, a churn module that identifies clients who are at risk, looking at millions and millions of data points of people's behavior patterns and say, hey, this is a person we think is at risk of churning, you should intervene. Here's what the right intervention is right now at this moment in time. And smart scheduling. Maybe you have a 4 o'clock class and a 5:30 class, and we can look at your overall client base, we can look at your historical reservation activity and your revenue and say, hey, we actually think it makes more sense to shift your schedule slightly. We think you should have a 30-minute class from 4:30 to 5, then an hour from 5 to 6, and then another class at from 6 to 7. So we can optimize your schedule using this kind of AI and ML. So the takeaways here are threefold. Number one, as I said, how well do you rate yourself as an e-commerce business? Are you taking advantage of how you show up in the digital or the offline environment in order to drive as much demand for your business as you can? Two, do you see any opportunities to use AI, ML to boost your performance? And three, this sort of macro million-dollar question, where can you use technology to drive competitive differentiation? Because as we said, it's that competitive differentiation that can really drive your pricing power, which is so key in the economic environment that we find ourselves in.
Okay,
Beth,
so let's
take us
recap. This is our state of the industry recap. So where have we been? Well, we talked about the pandemic. We talked about how it hit our industry particularly hard and how when we look at the comeback, it was a little uneven, but that there were some real silver linings when we looked at things by geography, by genre, and by vertical. We also learned that the consumers evolved, and so it's our responsibility as business owners to evolve with them. So what services are you offering? How are you messaging them? Who are you servicing? All of those things should evolve. How are you pricing things? This should evolve. We talked about inflation and how it's top of mind for Americans right now, but how we are really fortunate that our consumers are still prioritizing wellness spend. So my message here is, we're in a good industry. We're in an industry that is proving to be more recession-proof, and so we should continue to lean in here. And lastly, we talked about tech trends. So we have the big flashy tech, which you kind of have two options. You can pull those technologies into your businesses, or you can differentiate against them. But the ones that we actually think are more interesting are the less flashy ones, and those are the ones that MindBody are investing in for you. So AI, ML, e-commerce, these are things that you should be adopting. So if you're not, please talk to somebody at MindBody and we will help you this week get onboarded into some of those tools. All is to say, we have been on a journey, both tonight and then also in the last 2.5 years. But the thesis is that the state of the industry, it's bright. We're really excited about it. And I speak on behalf of myself and Zach and the whole MindBody ClassPass crew, that we are so honored to be on this journey with you. We are so proud of what you are doing as you bring wellness into your local communities. And so with that, I will close us and just say that if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to come find Zach and I. We hope you have a wonderful conference, and thank you.
Thank you.